What is microfeminism?
As I understand it, microaggressions,
Yeah.
but in a positive way. So microaggressions are small things that are done in a negative way, maybe like small microaggressions in racism or misogyny وكده. So on the flip side of that, microfeminism has kind of like adopted like the micro approach, the subtlety of some actions and words and practices
That are not aggressive.
in the day-to-day life. And how can we integrate and instill feminism and feminist actions and language in micro ways in our daily life to change things for the better in that space.
صباح الخير, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Sage Takes Time. I'm Elisa.
And I'm Amira.
And today, we're gonna pop some pills.
Yes. We are. We're gonna pop some good pills.
Some feminist pills, otherwise known as pink pills on the internet.
Yes.
And we're also gonna talk about microfeminism and ways that the online space has started to participate in kind of everyday feminist activism.
Yes.
Yeah, and try to understand, like, what is it? What does it mean? Should we do it? Are we doing it?
Yeah.
Why
and
is
what's
it
the
important?
difference also between microfeminism and pinkpilling
Yeah.
in today's world? And
Yeah.
the online space, in the online conversation, what are they trying to change?
Yeah.
Why do they need to change it?
Yeah.
And how can we participate? Yeah, that's today's episode. Don't forget to turn on notifications to follow along for all other episodes of the season and for all other Womina content. So on TikTok, I'm an avid TikTok user, as I've mentioned like 1,000 times in these episodes. And there's been a trend of things like microfeminism and pinkpilling.
Yeah. So what is it? What is microfeminism?
As I understand it, I'm still also learning about these things as we go along, but microfeminism are like the idea of microaggressions,
Yeah.
but in a positive way. So microaggressions are small things that are done in a negative way, maybe like small microaggressions in racism or misogyny وكده. Things that you like hardly notice, they're very subtle, but they really affect people and the society and whatever like stereotypes are perpetrated against a certain group of people. So on the flip side of that, microfeminism has kind of like adopted like the micro approach, the subtlety of some actions and words and practices
That are not aggressive.
in the day-to-day life. And how can we like integrate and instill feminism and feminist actions and language in micro ways in our daily life to change things for the better in that space. So that's microfeminism. It's not negative. Microaggression is obviously a very toxic, negative thing. Microfeminism is a positive thing that you can do as a feminist or someone that wants to promote the equality of men and women to further like those kinds of concepts and thoughts. How do you do that? By like incorporating subtle micro practices and words and ways of conversing with people كده in your day-to-day. It's not like a big action.
Yeah, it's a
like
small one.
Yeah.
So an example would be like...
An example would be if you're, let's say, if you're sending an email to a team, it would be to address maybe like the woman in the team as like the first person in the list of مثلا, hi, so-and-so, instead of like the man in the team. Or it's to even, some people would be like to place your email first as like the woman or the women in the team in the to line of the email instead of the men. Or in your email, if you're emailing a professional, like an office of like a doctor or a lawyer or something, and you don't know the gender of the doctor, you just know them as doctor, whatever, that you don't assume that that doctor is a man. So you, in your email, you will say, dear blah, 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 I'm wanting to book an appointment with Dr. X. When is she available? So you don't assume that automatically, which is something that we do subconsciously. And it takes a lot of effort to like unlearn that and consciously change that in your just like regular conversations or writing with people. So it's things like that. That's seen as like microfeminism.
Yeah, kind of addressing the biases that already exist in our brains by making people aware of them, essentially. So if somebody says, oh, shall I book an appointment with their secretary? The assumption, subconsciously, with bias, is that the secretary is female.
Yeah.
They would say, oh, can you give me her email address? And you go, actually, it's a him. Did you realize that you just said some fucked up shit?
Yeah. No, the microfeminism would be if you're that person and someone says secretary, then you would say, what's his email?
Right.
And you're flipping the script. You're not necessarily like educating the person that's doing the thing. You are just acting in a way that like flips the script on the assumptions that we have of like men and women, and as opposed to pinkpilling, which you maybe can explain.
Yeah, but I wanted to just pick up on microfeminism. I thought microfeminism also involved a type of like response, just making people aware of their inherent bias if they communicate it in a moment.
That's what pinkpilling is, as far as I understand it. Microfeminism is you are just taking an action or saying a thing that is the opposite of the presumed stereotypical separation of professions, occupations, gender roles, whatever in society that we have.
Yeah, so it's different to pinkpilling in that pinkpilling is a very intentional, educational, awareness-raising act that highlights the many, many disadvantages that women face in society. Pinkpilling comes from the red pilling and the red pilling community. And
What's red pilling?
So that's a very, like, it kind of comes from the movie The Matrix, you know, when Neo's offered the blue pill and the red pill. In theory, the red pill is what makes you, like, awake. You become awakened to what's really going on in society. And it was adopted by the online space primarily by far-right, conservative, incel communities. So like this, the involuntarily celibate, like online manosphere community considers themselves red-pilled when they wake up to what they consider all of the ways that society currently disadvantages men. And that actually like all of these things are fully repressive on men, and the way that women are is a way to manipulate men, and that they've become awakened to all of these horrible things happening. So the feminists have kind of co-opted the root of that term and used it now to actually, through scientifically backed like research and histories and evidence, show the people in their life how women are just treated differently in society and have historically been treated differently. And this can take like a lot of shapes, but it basically is very intentionally addressing or bringing up a subject that helps to kind of disseminate and share the truth of that. So, for example, my brother's wife is wondering what type of birthing process she wants to have when she gives birth. She's pregnant, she wants to have her baby. She's thinking about all the different birthing practices. Pinkpilling would be, you know, me sitting with her and saying, oh, well, at the end, it's totally your choice. But did you know that the history of of the birthing, similar to how we spoke to Noor Imam about obstetricians, and the history of that space was actually like taken over by organized groups of medicine practitioners that are predominantly men who came up with the right way to give birth in order to actually exclude women and doulas and like midwives from the birthing process to dominate that in the healthcare space. And for centuries, women were birthing on birthing stools or through squatting or on all fours in certain ways. Like they had their practices that they had inherently adopted, but doctors formalized and decided that the way that women has to give birth is on her back with her legs like this on a chair, and you need this medical equipment and this medical practitioner and an epidural and. And if it's not that, it's a C-section. Yani, these are the options that both require us as practitioners to do it. And at the end of the day, it's up to the person to make the choice as to how they want to go ahead with whatever they want in their life. But you're educating and informing them in the moment about a very real way that the world works against them. And to even continue on that example, to actually educate on the fact like, well, the healthcare system and hospitals try to schedule women in for C-sections because it's a predictable way that they can make money and have you in the hospital for the shortest amount of time that your hospital is going to pay for, and the doctor doesn't have to then be disrupted from his schedule to come and provide you the care that you need and the time that you need it. So this has then like been adopted and is used online now with wives filming their husbands as they tell them and share information with them, that is almost like, it's unbelievable to these people, the disadvantages that we're presenting. You know, did you know that 1 in 4 women in a US college campus has experienced sexual assault?
Right.
That's 25%. That means that if we have our daughter go to school, she has a 25% chance of being sexually assaulted on the college campus. What? What do you mean? No way, that can't be true. And it's that kind of like dialogue that you're
educating مثلا your partner or a male friend or something on menstrual cycles or like what women have to deal with, or like the lead that was discovered in tampons and how we've been taught to use these products, and that actually is very like unhealthy for women, but studies were not done on women. You know, there's a lot more women that are aware of these facts and statistics and research because it's part of our life, it's part of our daily life, it's part of our conversations. We're very aware of those things. But I think what's been interesting to see online is, like you were saying, like the reactions of people that are not aware or that don't have to know these things. When they hear these things that for other people are like givens, like, yeah, we know this, the shock on their face, as if we don't live in the same society. It's like we're in completely different realities. And I think Pinkpilling is a way to try, in whatever ins you have in a conversation, and sometimes also super spontaneously, like, fun fact, did you know, like X and Y? And seeing that reaction on people's face, a lot of the times it's men. It's kind of crazy that we're not living in the same reality. We don't have the same set of information that moves us in life.
One great example that I saw online was a wife asking her husband, when is the last time that you felt physically unsafe? Hey, and her husband's looking kida, and he's like, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago. 2 months ago, when I was at the gas station and it was 2 a.m. and there was like a couple people that were standing, but they didn't have a car, and I had to fill up the tank of gas, and I was just thinking, you know, something, or whatever example he gave. And then he goes, why? How often do you feel physically unsafe? And she's like, this morning. He's like, what happened? She goes, well, I went for my morning jog and I jogged through the path that I usually take. And somebody was running that I didn't see, or somebody else was on the road, aslan, or somebody was running who didn't look like they were a runner. And their speed started catching up to me. Or just last night when I was coming home, parked the car in the garage, there were people, like, women have completely normalized. To us, it's adi. Like, to us, it's so adi that we are in constant threat of physical safety wherever we are, day or night, whatever country we're in, whatever age we're at. That's kind of like just a normal thing that we balance with throughout the day. And men just don't have that. They don't have know
that layer of thought.
They don't have that layer of thought or logistics that they have to work through. Like, okay, from my garage to my door, okay, I'm gonna take my keys. And how many women have parked in like a public garage and put their keys in between your fingers, and you have to know, how do I hold my keys if I need to like hit someone? Or do I have pepper spray on my keychain, Aslan? Or I sleep with pepper spray in a hidden thing next to my bed, just in case.
The key thing is really interesting because they're just keys, you know? And I had this experience once where I would like kind of did that without thinking, this like you put it between like your fingers. And I was with a male friend and I was like, this is not even intentionally Pinkpilling. I just was like throwing it out there. And the shock also, like, really? You know, like the idea that that's how we walk around at night. And especially like for me in Cairo, like with sexual harassment on the street as you're walking by people in cars, men in cars, that's like a big thing. And so I often walk, just in case you have to like scratch someone's car, is there, if they get too close, like these little things that are, you would never think it's otherwise. Or I was telling someone also that, like, you know, whenever I used to get in a taxi, I used to always open the door. Like I would close the door and then open it before we move to make sure that I can open it from the inside, that it opens, that it's not like boys, yani, it's not like the door is not working or it locks on the inside and he has to open it for me. Or things like if I ask for like a tissue from the tissue box, if I'm in an Uber or a taxi and I won't take like the top one, I'll take like the fifth, I'll be like, can I have several?
Why?
Because sometimes they can spray something on like the top one.
Oh, they spray something like as a threat.
But just these little things that we've learned to normalize, and we do now without thinking. they're part of the same movement, okay? Like all these two things are part of feminist thinking, having a feminist lens on your daily actions and relationships and words that you use. It's not like they're distinctly different things with different goals. Like at the end of the day, they have a very similar purpose to feminist advocacy and people fighting to change certain laws. But I think what people are noticing more and more is like all the little things we can do throughout our day-to-day lives that can either flip the script or educate people around us at every opportunity we can, so that the conversations and the words and the mindset is changing, not just in the big, massive like movements and writings and like feminist thinking and papers and books that we're consuming, because I feel like that alienates certain kinds of people from the conversation. And these, through social media, are ways to bring that down to a very like tangible, subtle, small, micro level that you can get it. Like if I tell you this one small piece of information because we're just talking about this topic, or you're a guy and you made like a kind of like joke that usually would be like, haha, it's not so funny for women, but like we're gonna let it go. Like I'll use that as an opportunity to like, funny, but did you know that like this percentage of women dies because of this? It's like an opportunity to educate on a smaller scale and integrate more into our daily lives these things that can help make a bigger impact. And the interesting thing about like Pinkpilling, like it's a pill that you take and it's like this one little thing, or like microfeminism, it's that's kind of the effect of social media, right? It's like the fast consumption.
These small doses of information.
Small doses, short attention spans, little things that you can quickly consume or see as you're scrolling. They're not going to take up 20 minutes of your time. You don't have to read a whole book, but you can understand this one little thing. And the accumulation of them, I think, is the goal. And the accumulation of knowledge and changing words and language can add up to big change.
It also feels a lot less threatening. Because of how bad of a rep feminism and the word feminism has had in the past, especially from men who kind of fear the aggression that comes with being super outspoken and wanting to fight for systemic change. And to be honest, women suffer from incredible disadvantages in the world. So it makes you angry. Like the violence towards women can make you so angry. So of course there's going to be this like aggressive approach, and for years and hundreds of years and millennia, like women are like sick of it. So you're going to have this wave of like aggressive movements. But now what's different is it is, like you said, like much more digestible without such an intimidation towards it, and without really having to like deeply engage. Because Aslan, I'm telling you a fact. Did you know that in 1993, X amount of people suffered from this in this country? Did you know that that was normal? Or did you know that every 3 days there's a femicide in France, and in Mexico it's 10 a day? Did you know that that's the state of like khalas? And then I say they don't have to argue, but what do you consider and what do you know? That's just a fact. Take it, digest it, you do with it what you want. And it kind of starts instilling this like different way of critical thinking for people, where the more you do it, the more you get into it, it literally rewires your brain to start understanding that, oh, that happened in this case, I bet it's happening in this case. Or I wonder how this is going to kind of like lead back to a different kind of injustice towards women and something. So it kind of shifts the way people are now taking other things.
You're also not expecting like the person to go out and necessarily like educate themselves in a massive way. You're in a way not relieving them of the burden, but like we said, you're making more digestible. Like for example, like if you're in an office that has a lot of men and they're, how the ACs in offices run colder because men's temperatures tend to run hotter and women are often cold in these corporate offices or closed spaces with ACs, and they're not aware of that, but we are. We are aware that we tend to get more cold, and now we know why. Now we know because our temperatures are different, but you're not waiting for them. Like there's no burden on them to seek that knowledge. You're bringing it into their daily life, into the office, into a conversation, into an email. And that can make it a lot more easier to, like you're saying, have that critical mind of like, I wonder why these things are the way they are. Like, I wonder why are seatbelts designed for men? Like, did you even know that seatbelts are designed with crash test dummies that are centered around like the male body and not the female body.
Yeah, and actually most pills for research weren't even like needed to be tested on women's hormonal cells or women's cells. Everything was tested with men's cells because women's cells in medical testing are less predictable. Because they're different than men's cells. They suffer different types of fluctuations, which makes them unpredictable, which makes it harder to create the medicine that they need. But then what it does is the medicine that's created, that's put out for men and for women, is actually then not actually suited for women's bodies and the way that they break down. And you didn't have even the idea of medical testing on women's cells or medical research done to differentiate between men and women in science, like until the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't even within the realm of consciousness. And that starts to explain why so many symptoms and side effects and things are normalized for women to suffer with and to deal with, but men have like a zero tolerance to it, or it doesn't manifest.
Yeah.
Crash test dummies, for example, they didn't test them until very, very, very recently on like female body types, or pregnant, for example. Pregnant women, in theory, like could get even more injured from the seatbelt than anything else in driving a car.
It's the kind of information that I would have had to either seek out or be someone that's interested in that space. So if there's like some medical article or some like news article about this research that was done, then I click on it because I'm interested in this, in the feminist thinking and research and women's health. So I seek the information, or when I see it, I consume it intentionally, as opposed to someone else that can scroll by it and not really. So it's like bringing that out and making it this like little like fun fact. Did you know? Here you go. It's like, it's much, much easier. And I think it can contribute a lot more effectively to just general understanding of the differences that we talk about on a more intellectual and like broader academic almost level.
Yeah. Especially, I mean, I know that it's very easy for us, for you and I as individuals, because we work in this space and we're surrounded by this. It's very natural with the people around us to kind of be like pink-pilling very often. But I'm curious to know, what kind of acts of microfeminism do you engage in, whether like consciously or unconsciously?
I don't think I do. I don't know. I don't know.
Are there no things, like I'm thinking about, like for me, I've always made it a point, for example, to like try to humanize the woman who very often is put on like a pedestal. And my little acts of microfeminism are things like saying the word period, or like not being afraid to let people know that it's okay to say you're on your cycle and that's what's happening right now, and just normalize the fact that that's a thing that's going on, and not to be ashamed of it or to hide or to run around from the word or the fact that it's even happening in the first place. Like, I make it a point, and sometimes people are very uncomfortable if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just so tired because I'm on my period right now. Like, hey, how did she say that out loud to people? Like, oh my God, aren't you ashamed? Don't you have this? Oh my God, how embarrassing. For me, that's a very conscious thing that I do to kind of just normalize things and try to make them less serious.
What's important about microfeminism and pink pilling is that, given that there is things like red pilling and the radicalization of certain communities online through content and through storytelling and through conversations in very direct and very subtle ways, that now it's become even more important to have the counter to that, because that is used very much as like a very effective tactic to like recruit and indoctrinate people and change their mindsets and radicalize them. Like that's essentially what red pilling is to radicalize you in one direction. And so if we're talking about the online space, which is where these things kind of crept up and became like trends, it is important to have those as counters to that, because this is definitely something that has existed and has been very dominant in the space for the past few years. And we're seeing how effective it has been, to the point that like certain political parties all over the world are regaining ground because of these things, not just, but also because of those things that are happening in conversations online. So there has to be the presence of things like pink pilling online as well.
I also really appreciate how it helps kind of carry the weight, the weight of this knowledge. The more I learn, the more I go through the world being a woman, the more I learn about what it means to be a woman truly in in the world, what we've been told to just swallow and keep down and accept. It's so much. And not only do I share in that with my community, but actually more and more, like with each person that kind of denies its existence, the weight gets even heavier on my back, you know? And I appreciate when I'm able to like share, the more that we talk about these things, the more that we're sharing that information and exposing people who otherwise might be ignorant to it or just choose naivete around it. You're telling them, hey, this is a lot of a load that I'm actually carrying. I want you to be aware of the same things so you can be under with me and actually help me lift this load. Or we all need to kind of get to the same reality because we are living in completely different realities. And it's not just that the world treats you different and the world treats me different. It's you don't even perceive how the world is treating me different.
Yeah. You're not, you don't have transparency on that, or you don't have the knowledge of it. I think because we also talk a lot about intersectional feminism. So right now we're saying microfeminism and pinkpilling and giving a lot of examples of like women and how they can talk to the men in their lives or other women. يعني كده, and it's like about gender roles and the women's place in society كده. But if you're taking an intersectional feminist approach to it, then that can include information and acts and little like tweaks in language and in actions. Also about things having to do with like racism, with the environment, with political or geopolitical issues all around the world, like مثلا the question of Palestine or what's happening in our region, like Sudan, Congo, Yemen, all of these areas. Like there can be the knowledge and the information inserted on those things as well, on things that we're learning about persistently racist structures that largely target people of color, مثلا in America or in Europe or even in our region. It's not necessarily, we're talking about them and how they are related to women, but we can also then expand that to insert whatever we want and whatever our definition of being intersectional feminists can be. Yeah.
Micro acts of anti-racism, for example.
Yeah.
Micro acts of compassion, or like, I think that this is definitely like I don't know, it's a good trend because at the core of it, it just normalizes very quickly very important things. It's not about large, massive change. It's about small doses towards a more sustainable change. Because if you're just shifting the way people see it, and this is one of the big reasons that we have Womina, for example, is like we're actually just trying to tell stories that matter, and those stories that we tell help literally shape the societies that we can envision for ourselves and that we can build. And when we start normalizing these little comments and these things and the truths and the realities with each other, then what we're really doing is we're kind of investing in a longer term shift in societal change, because we're investing in the fact that the person that we're dealing with might have just had, with my comment or my story or my behavior, the tiniest little degree shift in their perspective. And that degree shift is going to be towards a more humane, more acceptable, more like human-centric recognition of the other.
Yeah, that's so true. Like a lot of our content, even though we say we're like a feminist media company, a lot of our content, especially like the first few years, was not about feminism. Like we didn't مثلا explain feminist terms or ideologies or thoughts. Like that wasn't really the content. It was about platforming women, giving women a space and a voice and highlighting their stories and inspiring other women to see these different realities. And maybe in that in itself, like you're saying, was a form of like microfeminism or pinkpilling. It wasn't overtly about feminist thought and research and academia, but it was just like women exist in these spaces and here's what they're doing and this is what they think and the challenges that they face and their mental health and all of these conversations that then created this big online space as well, and like brought a lot of impact and inspiration to certain communities.
To a lot of communities. It wasn't even our target, but one thing I remember receiving a lot of was surprise and shock from people outside our general, demographic. But let's say like Far East or Far Western men were coming and saying, I didn't know women in the Middle East could look so diverse. Or like, I didn't even know we could see past the niqabs. Like they had their stereotypes of what the region was and what the women in the region were and what they lived and what they endured, which was these Western stereotype narratives that we all know. But we weren't even talking to them aslan, but we were just telling our truth. And that was in and of itself a kind of radical act of feminism. It was a radical act of like self-actualization and letting people know, hey, our community is here. Look at the diversity within our community. Look at the business leaders and the technologists and the entrepreneurs and the investors and the singers and the rappers and the dancers and the creatives who all are living in this part of the world. And this is what they're doing. And it completely, in and of itself, just confronting somebody with an opposing view, creating cognitive dissonance between what they think they know and what we're now presenting, was enough of a radical shift to where I don't think you would have the same perception if you went to those same places and you asked them, what is an Arab woman? What does she look like? Mm-hmm. They're not going to have that same extreme perception of singular, closed-minded, stereotype caricatures as they did in the 90s, for example, or in the early 2000s. Now, the work of Wamina and other people in this space in our communities is that we've that was our small act. It's just existing. Yeah. Right? Visibly.
Yeah. But on that note, I think it's very important to acknowledge the huge privilege we have and the privilege that comes with the conversations we're having, given who we are and our place in society and the kind of content we create.
100%.
The kind of content we consume and being online aslan and doing this in English and all of these things, that the things that we're saying as examples of pinkpilling and microfeminism وكذا, there's a really large segment of the population, especially in a country like Egypt where we're filming the podcast and other countries in the region as well. There's a huge segment of the population that's affected by things that are much more culturally, religiously ingrained in society, in laws and structures that make all of this a lot more restrictive and access to this knowledge a lot more restrictive, and not just access to the knowledge, but what you can do with the knowledge that you have and how you can advocate for it in a micro way or in a macro way. And like, what spaces do you have to have this information or to consume this information or to seek it and even discuss it with your friends and with your partner and with your father or with your male friend? Or it's so different.
Yeah, pinkpilling has to take on a completely different form.
It goes back to like grassroots advocacy. And in a country like Egypt where the rates of female genital mutilation are still above 85%, and one of the highest rates in the world. And the regional rates are also high, but Egypt's just as an example. That issue, I don't know the amount of pinkpilling and microfeminism, like I cannot even think of an example of like microfeminism that can help someone that is living in some rural area or a village or an underdeveloped community where this practice is normalized and expected and upheld by the society, despite actually that the laws have changed and criminalized this act, but still the society and the community, for the large part, practices it and does it in secrecy or with all like the family honor and the traditional element and the pseudo-religious thinking behind it. I just can't think of an example, to be totally honest, where microfeminism and pinkpilling on TikTok can like help this community of women or young girls. That kind of education and awareness raising and changing the cultural narrative and expectations and kida comes not through those things that we're talking about. It comes through like grassroots activism and advocacy by institutions that need a lot of funding to do their research and then name the things and label them and then go out in these remote places and all around these huge countries that we inhabit in the Arab world that are much bigger than they look on our maps, that we're used to seeing in these far-reaching places, to bring that knowledge to people. And even if you bring the scientific knowledge, getting over the cultural and social expectations and how deeply rooted they're ingrained in the thinking, without trying to make it fit, I think we can just acknowledge that this conversation comes from a pretty privileged space and it doesn't necessarily apply to maybe 85 to 90% of the issues that those communities of women are facing and the kind of change that is needed to mitigate those issues and to bring positive change to those women's lives. So I don't know, I'm just acknowledging it as like people acknowledge their privilege, like not necessarily for a specific goal, but I think it's like an important thing contextually to say.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I'm just more like internally an optimist. And when I think I see so much activism in the online space, and I also see more smartphone penetration than ever before. Like people in far-reaching remote places who would never 30 years ago have been exposed to, let's say, these alternative conversations and ways of thinking and ideas. Now it's literally in their pocket. It's in multiple phones within a home. And there's ways to reach them without such large institutions and nonprofits and big kind of like top-down approach or grassroots movements that are struggling. Like a woman like Miriam Aziz or Noor Imam, with the content that they're making online in Arabic that's accessible now, can reach the pockets of the people who would be perpetrating this. It can reach a wider audience, but it's not necessarily going to reach all audience. And that's not to say that we should then not perform like or not practice these things online and still be part of the discourse that's happening online through content and through reels and through our individual creators, like not to diminish the role of that. It's just an addition. We have to recognize that there's like so much work to be done and understand the cultures that we're in and the societies that we're in and the struggles, and that maybe like something like Pinkpilling information to your husband in a way that highlights the amount of unpaid labor and care work that women do in society might not be and is not as easy for some women to do compared to others. For sure. And if anything, it's probably like way down their priority list of the things that need to be addressed with their husband in the first place. You know what I mean? Like getting equal pay or getting recognized for unpaid labor is like the least of my worries at this point. But I mean, I will say the same thing. I tell people that like kind of sometimes critique us for doing this kind of content in English, but then saying that like we inspire women and change in the Arab world. Like I've had these conversations with friends that are like, how can you say that when also doing the content in English? And it's like, what I say is, you know, there is space for so many different things to be, which we talked about in another episode also. No, there's space for us to have this conversation in English and target certain audiences. And there's a lot of space for someone else to do maybe even the same exact or different kind of content in the same space in Arabic and offline. And all of these things are needed. So it's not just like, because there are bigger issues and larger segments of the population dealing with more entrenched issues, that you cannot be having this conversation in a podcast that's for YouTube, that's by us, that's in English. Yani, they're not mutually exclusive. They both need to be happening and can be happening in a way that contributes to each other in a positive way. Yeah. So it's not just Pinkpilling and microfeminism that's going to save the world from like crumbling into like a dystopian future of like bleak inequality, but it's also going to be the grassroots. Future is another episode because that's coming. You're saying there's also room to continue. There's also a dystopian future that we need to be on the lookout for, but I mean, we're kind of in it. We're kind of in it. But from crumbling more into this dystopian future, there's space for these small acts and these micro moments of education and micro stands that we take as activists in little pockets of time. But there's also still very, very much room for massive, large initiatives and institutions and actual grassroots activism that's on the ground and that's directly targeting people. Yeah, and what last notes, يعني كده before we wrap, is what I've seen of microfeminism on like TikTok at least, and people like have fun with it. And you're like fucking around, and you're just like within yourself كده like switching the order of emails or saying like he for a secretary instead of she, which most, you know, it's kind of something that you can also have a little fun with. And it's a fun way to incorporate this into your daily life. It doesn't have to be such a like, let's talk about the problems that, you know, misogyny and patriarchy. It's a little bit less serious, but equally important. Yeah. So do it. Yeah, find the ways. Find the ways. Feminist in you. Yeah. And bring her out. And find the ways that you can just, you know, fuck around for fun to make people aware of their inherent biases. Yeah. Thank you for listening to this episode of Sage Takes Time. Tell us what you think. What forms of microfeminism do you practice or will you try to practice? And who have you pink-pilled lately?
let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, share with your friends, become a member on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, because that goes into supporting the work that we do at Womina.
You might even consider the work of Womina as creating content that can be used to pink pill your favorite people in your life. And so if you're contributing to Womina in whatever way that is, whether monetary or through whatever pixelated engagement you choose to, consider that your good act of feminism for the day. We really appreciate it.